Great, the little red dot is on.
All right, ready?
Go for it.
Hi, everybody. So my name is Felicia Hubacz, and I'm a DCR forester for the Forest Health Program. Today, I'm going to be talking to you about careers with trees. This is something that's very near and dear to my heart because when I was young, I only knew that I wanted to work with trees, but I had no idea how to go about it. So I took a very windy path, which I will tell you in a minute. So I'll start with my story, then I'll give you guys a bunch of other positions in the careers with trees. And from there, we'll talk to the stars of the show, Nicole Keleher and Ruth Seward. So before I move on, I just want to point out the quote that I have at the bottom of the screen by David Attenborough, who's one of my heroes. An understanding of the natural world and what's in it is a source of not only a great curiosity, but great fulfillment. And that has certainly been true for me. So my story kind of begins with this tree. In this photo here, that's me and my little brothers in this tree that I was about 7 in this photo. And my dad, when he was about that same age, went into the woods and dug up a little red maple, brought it home and planted it. And since that day, it's just been in the family, and that's always been my dad's tree. We grew up playing in that tree, and since then, my nieces and nephews have even played in that tree. So it's funny to see how you can have an emotional tie to something as simple as a tree and how great that can be. So, you know, as a kid, I knew I wanted to work in forests. I just didn't know what that meant. And growing up, I ended up in high school, and the realization hit me that I didn't have any money or any way of going to college at that point in time. So reality set in, and I went to work. I was a cook, and I cooked at a couple of restaurants and ended up at a university that's renowned for its dining services. And it was a great job. I stayed there for quite some time. I built up seniority, built up a nice pay, but I just wasn't happy with the work. You know, it was good work, and sure, everybody loves to eat, but I always found myself looking out the window or taking all my breaks outside. And frequently, my coworkers would have to leave their jobs because they would hurt their backs. That was a very common incident. And I thought to myself, why am I doing this? I'm still young, I can always take a chance. So I gave up security and took a chance at my dream. And I didn't know what that meant. But I knew the local community college had a course in landscape design and management technology. And I thought, I can do that. That sounds great. So I went there, and while I was taking those courses, I also worked out in the field, and I tried to do different jobs so I could get a good feeling of everything out there. And I did a greenhouse assistant where I did a lot of propagating and transplanting of plants, getting things ready for the season, like poinsettias or geraniums. And then like cleaning up and taking care of house plants for sale, as well as the annuals. And that was all right. But once again, I was surrounded by beautiful flowers, but I was inside and I didn't want to be inside. So I went outside and started working in the nursery where I worked with the shrubs and the trees. I got to learn about equipment and moving things around, and work with homeowners and other people who were looking just to buy a couple of plants for their business or even for gifts. And so that was cool because I got to talk to people about things I was passionate about, which trees and shrubs. It was so great. But it was a seasonal job. It was very physically demanding. And once again, I was like, this isn't how I want to live my life. I'm going to college for a reason. So when I finished with my degree at Stick, which was an associate's degree, I then decided to go on to UMass. And I received my bachelor's there. And the degree I took was natural resources with a minor in forestry. I did that not only because it transferred very well, but also it gave me a broader net. Once again, I knew I was heading in the right direction, but I didn't have a specific goal. So I went through that, and while doing that, I worked as an assistant forester for a local nonprofit, and I fell in love. I got paid to go hiking. I did a lot of trail maintenance and invasive species work, and it was just amazing. I packed my lunch, went into the woods, and I spent the day there. I saw all kinds of things, and I fell in love. I knew forestry was for me, and I just had to figure out what kind of forestry. So when I got out of school, I wasn't able to find a forestry job, unfortunately. So I fell back on my landscape design. And I did that for 3 years. It was fun. It was all right pay, but you work sunrise to sundown, and you end up with the winter off. After Christmas, everything shuts down, and if you're not plowing, you're not working. So once again, that really didn't thrill me. So I started poking around for other jobs, and luckily, ALB had a reforestation crew. They started a new program. I applied to be a forester within it, and it was sweet. I now got to take my show on the road. Instead of waiting for people to come to me, we went door to door asking people who lost trees to the ALB if they wanted free trees. And as foresters, we were there to inform them about the tree's characteristics and best growing locations. So we would help them find a better tree for themselves, maybe not better, but a different non-ALB host tree. And we would even go and plant that for them. And a lot of people were very emotional about this. There were trees that kids planted, that parents planted, folks that have been deceased, and then to see these trees get cut down over a beetle was hard on these people. And by being there and giving them a tree, I used to call us the good guys, but it was very rewarding. And I knew I was going in a good direction. But the other thing that happened at that point in time is that I learned about invasive insects, and I couldn't get enough. So I did more research, and I ended up taking additional classes for more entomology. I ended up taking something like 17 credits of entomology outside of my bachelor's degree, just because I was so passionate about it. And then that gave me the credentials to become a forest health forester. And so now I get to do all those great things I did as a replanter or reforester. But the difference here is, instead of planting trees, I now go out and look for pests and talk to people about pests. I do a lot of outreach, and it's something I really enjoy. You know, it's like having a great hobby and having people that you can talk to about your hobby. And this is what I get paid for. So I think anybody can do it. I started late in life and had absolutely no money, so it can be done. And I believe I'm proof of that. So let's look at some of the other careers that are out there where you can work with trees. Now you'll notice there's two sides here. You have the obvious and the not so obvious. Now the obvious professions right there are the ones that I went to, because I didn't know any better. If I had known, I probably would have taken a straighter shot. But it's hard to say, because I learned a lot on my journey, and it definitely taught me something about myself. I learned that I really dislike being bored during my career. If I get bored while doing something, it is no longer interesting to me, and I no longer want to do it. So forest health is I'm always learning something. Same with urban forestry, project coordinators, ecologists. So let's move on and talk about each and every single one of these. So arborists, now this is usually what you think of when you think of somebody who's a tree person. You know, they maintain the health of trees and shrubs, and they do it in a variety of ways. Now, not every arborist can do all of these duties. You know, some specialized, and they'll do one or two of these items, like maybe I want to be a pesticide applicator and a tree trimmer. So that's very common. Now with this profession, you can see they're up in the trees. Most of these jobs don't require college, but they do require, or certification, but I highly recommend certification. Arborists and loggers, very, very high accident rate. These are considered hazard jobs. Yes, they're great because you don't need a whole lot of skills or a lot of college behind you to make a decent amount of money, but you're making that money because you're putting yourself at risk. So if you're a thrill seeker and you know, you kind of like a little bit of risk, this could be the job for you. Now, with that being said, you can limit your risk depending on what arborist positions you take. Tree and shrub nurseries, these grow trees and shrubs, and they also sell them. Now, they don't always sell to the public. Sometimes nurseries are created just to grow plants for a restoration program or other restoration programs, or even research. Sometimes if you want to research a tree, a specific tree, you have to get those trees, and then you'll need the controls. So tree and shrub nurseries can be very interesting. They don't have to all be about selling. Landscape professionals, that's what I did. I did design. Architect is a two more years of education than I had for landscape, and it also allows you to do bigger projects. Installation, it's very self-explanatory, and management. Once you have a landscape in, you have to maintain it in order to keep it looking the way you want it to. Forest and park rangers, these folks work to maintain safety for our park guests and preserve the natural ecosystem. If you're somebody who likes being outside, but you're more on the legal or policy side, not so much the science side, this is definitely a good position for you. These folks mostly help enforce the rules, but they also do a lot of outreach. So this is a good job for people who like to talk. Equipment operators, trees are very heavy and you can't just throw them over your shoulder and walk out the forest. So we always need somebody to run skinners, feller bunchers, loaders, dozers, graders. Not only that, but you need them to drive tractor trailer trucks. You have to have a way of moving, whether it's timber or mulch or whatever. And usually there's no formal education for equipment operators, but there can be a lot of credentialing. Foresters, now, they plan, maintain, and preserve forests and forest resources for public and private use. And there's different kinds of forestry. You have the foresters who will manage a plot of land for an agency, whether it's public or private. You have or even nonprofit. You have service forestry, which is a type of forestry from a government or nonprofit agency where a forester will come out and help you make decisions on your land and guide you through the process. And then you have private forestry, where you have the individual who just has a bunch of clients and goes out and writes management plans and cutting plans. And speaking of plans, there were a lot of different reasons to manage the woods or the forest. I know a lot of people think forester, they just want to cut trees and timber. That is not true. I have never in my life met a forester who wants nothing more than to do tree cutting. We are trained and we get into this environment, this field, because we love the forest and we love that ecosystem. So the last thing we want to do is damage it. And the other thing with this position is I have a picture here of 4 people, and these are multiple foresters who are consulting on a cut. Typically, foresters are the type of people who enjoy working alone and are comfortable being alone in the woods. So that's also something to be aware of. It is not a morning gathering at the coffee pot. Forest Health Specialist is a bit different than forestry, because you're taking forest as a whole, and you're looking at just the health of it. You're looking at identifying new forest health threats, monitor pest and disease populations, and develop management projects and eradication programs. So it's like you need to be trained as a forester, know entomology and pathology. So it's almost like those 3 degrees and an outreach person or somebody who can communicate and do public speaking, because we gather all this data not for ourselves. We give it back to the public. So we then notify the public of what's going on, municipalities, and the actual folks who do the work. So we will notify other foresters and loggers about what's going on. So I love this job. There's always something new to learn, never a dull moment. I'm always researching a new forest health threat, a new insect, a new pathogen, and then going out into the field to see it. So it's a good also half in the office and then half out in the field kind of job. Urban foresters, now these are other folks who do a lot of public outreach. They care for urban forest ecosystems, including individual trees, anywhere there are people. So anywhere you have an urban environment, you can have an urban forester. And so they'll go out and they'll use natural science and social science to create an ecosystem that's good for everybody, that's good for the wildlife, it's good for the trees, and healthy and better for the people who live in those communities. And while you're out there, you always get a lot of questions. What are you doing? Is there a bird in that tree? And that's a great way to educate people on what's going on with trees and get them excited and interested. So this is very common in the field to hear urban forestry is forestry for people who like people, unlike the traditional forestry where you just want to be alone. Just a joke. So then there's ecologists. Now, these are specialist scientists who survey ecosystems and assess the diversity, profusion, and behavior of the different organisms within them. And they tend to work for agencies, nonprofits, trusts like that. Conservation scientists, they manage, improve, and protect the country's natural resources. And they'll also advise farmers, ranchers, and other agricultural managers on improving their land for agricultural purposes and control erosion. And I just want to say that you may not realize it, but trees are an agricultural product and not just tree farms. So if you look at forestry, that's considered agricultural. Project coordinators. Now, this is a great position for folks who don't really want to go into the field, but they want to play their part. They track each stage of the project throughout their life cycle and share critical information among the various team members. Rarely do they get out into the field. Sometimes they'll go out just to see what's going on, but these are very important positions because without these folks, a project can be quite a mess, and nobody wants to get involved with that. So this is a position for somebody who's organized, is good at communicating, and is just really good at managing information and financials. It's a very challenging position. Environmental education. Now, what this does is it doesn't refer to people teaching little kids in school. It's a lot of nonprofits are now moving to hire environmental education professionals, and they'll do programs, so it's not so much a class, but they'll do programs and workshops for various ages and groups. It's a very rewarding field, especially if you like teaching but aren't interested in doing it in a traditional setting. And then finally, we have research. Now, like I said, this isn't all the jobs out there. This is just a smattering so that it can get you thinking. And research, you need your researchers. They research various aspects of the forest. Once again, these folks typically work for universities. And the work that they do is invaluable because people like me can't do my job unless we know the data, because we're very serious about the data. We're definitely scientists. So with that, let's get on to the stars of the show. Ruth Seward, who is Director for Outreach and Community Engagement at Tower Hill Botanic Garden.
All right, so I wanted to talk about how I work with urban trees in the urban environment in Worcester. My name is Ruth Seward, and I am the Director of Outreach and Community Engagement for Tower Hill Botanic Garden. Prior to that, I was the director of the Worcester Tree Initiative, which helped with the reforestation efforts in and around Worcester due to the Asian longhorn beetle. But over the years, Tower Hill decided to take us on as a program. And so now Worcester Tree Initiative sits as a program under the umbrella of outreach and community engagement at the garden. I wanted to give you a background as to why I'm so interested in working with urban trees. Here you will see 2 examples of some of the problems we have growing trees in the urban environment. On the left, you can see that a large tree has fallen, mostly because its roots were cut either for sidewalk work or for updated road work. And the tree just couldn't be held in with these tiny roots that have been cut. On the right, you see a tree that we have planted that clearly got either hurt through lawn mowing or through weed whacking. And this is just a problem all over the city. We've wound up designing our cities where we try to stick trees and green space in existing built environment rather than trying to redesign our cities around green space. And so this is the problem that we have a lot of times with urban trees. So a lot of what I do is education around how to plant a tree, how to have proper establishment care for a tree, and also how to take care of trees as they grow older. And I'll get into that a little more in my next slides. It's another example of how we have a very built environment in many parts of Worcester, and we try really hard to get tiny trees that will grow in a right spot. So a lot of times when I plant trees, I look for a right place, right location for the tree. And this is a spot where there is actually a large area of lawn. It's next to a family health center. But again, it speaks to how we try to fit green space into a built environment. And I'm trying to advocate more and more for when we redesign areas for built environment, we include green space as an important element. It improves a lot of quality of life for people. And so a lot of what I go back to people is I remind them of the benefits of urban trees. Trees are the largest land plant that provide oxygen for us. Most of our oxygen does come from the oceans, but a large amount does come from the plants on Earth, on land, and trees are the biggest producers of oxygen. They also sequester CO2, which is important as climate changes and as ice melts and carbon dioxide gets released more and more into the atmosphere. They soak up stormwater, which is critical in a built environment. There's many studies showing that having trees where you live improves mental health. They also provide wildlife habitat and they add beauty to the environment. And finally, they provide food, which is something that even in an urban setting is important. It's becoming more and more important, especially in cities where there are food deserts, where there aren't grocery stores or places to purchase food. And also the type of immigrant that Worcester sees right now. There are people who have farmed the lands and they come to Worcester. It's really nice to create spaces for people to grow fruit trees and or nut trees along with other crops in the urban setting for a lot of positive reasons, but one is so that they can have fresh food and produce. I wanted to cite this article, which is from Yale University by Fred Pierce. The title of it is Rivers in the Sky, How Deforestation is Affecting Global Water Cycles. Right now, a lot of the environmental movement talks about our energy usage and how we can reduce our emissions by reducing petrochemicals. But we also have, and trees are really good at that because they do soak up CO2, like I cited before. But it's also important to recognize how trees really do help with the water cycle. Water is critical for life on Earth. And I think in the Northeast, we can take that for granted. But a lot of studies show how trees can actually, through their transpiration, they can increase cloud coverage above them and allow for clouds to form and keep that water cycle routinely coming. And that's important, as you know, for our own water consumption and also our crop water consumption. So I encourage you to look up this article. It's very well done. It's from 2018. This is an example of one of my young adult foresters. It's a program that I run through the summer where we will get a list of all the City of Worcester street trees that have been planted, and we provide water for them. This year was for 14 weeks from May through the end of September. And in the summertime for 7 weeks, I employ students who are on summer vacation to help us fill up the gator bags. Water is critical for the photosynthesis process of trees. And in the first 2 years of life, it's really important for trees to establish their roots. And the best way to do that is to keep them well hydrated, even in the difficult dry months. So this is just another job in the environment of working around trees. And my job is to coordinate these students. I also have a supervisor that supervises them. And then I have young folks out in the field helping us water and take care of young trees. We also plant a lot of trees. Initially, when I came to the Worcester Tree Initiative, which is now part of outreach and community engagement, that was my whole job, was to give trees to homeowners after training them how to properly plant and care for them. It also, we do a lot of community plantings, and we always have. There's nothing better than trying to get well-planted trees into the urban environment. And a lot of times we supplement the City of Worcester public trees by planting either in people's yards or on community spaces or in parks. So this is a residential housing area, and we planted about 8 trees with the residents on this location. Like I said before, we educate a lot about trees, and there's nothing better to learn, or no better way to learn than hands-on activities. So this was a program this summer where we had students from the Latino Institute come and help us plant trees in Dodge Park. And we taught them how to properly plant a tree. We helped them to plant a tree. We helped them properly mulch the tree, and they helped us to water the trees. And we've been caring for those trees ever since they were planted in early summer this year. There are a lot of tree people in the industry, and Felicia Hubacz had gone through a lot. In my world, at Tower Hill, there are horticulturalists, and they know about trees. They may know more about plants and flowers, but they certainly know about the basic biology of trees and how to care for trees. There are arborists, and I happen to be a certified arborist, and they think about trees, and they know how to prune trees and think about tree health. In my world, I do a lot of reporting as to how trees are doing, both in the parks where we planted and the private locations where we planted, but also street trees in Worcester. We try to figure out how many trees are around and how they're doing. There are also botanists and hydrologists, foresters, field technicians, environmental engineers, and municipal planners. And in my world, municipal planners are critical because they're the ones deciding how much space is left for built environment versus nature environment in an urban setting. I think a lot about environmental justice. This is a map of Worcester, and all the green spots are trees that have been planted by the City of Worcester over the past 12 years. And you can see that there are swaths of area, mostly in the lower right-hand corner, that do not have a lot of trees. And these are usually poorer areas that are more densely populated. And more, we try very hard to get trees into those environments because of the health benefits, because of the mental health benefits, and also because of the other benefits that trees provide to people, but also to the built infrastructure. So for instance, them reducing stormwater, that really does help with the built environment in the city, especially in the dense areas. Just to show you, these colors come from the Department of Conservation and Recreation. The darker the color, the more at risk the populations are that live in these areas. And in Worcester, we're thinking about English isolation, low economics, or people that are very new to the country. And so if they have these different categories, if they have one, then they'll be light. If they have 2 or more, they'll be a little bit darker. But if they have 3 at-risk categories for environmental justice and health problems, they have a darker color attached to them. And so this purple color is the darkest color, meaning that people that live in this area are the highest risk for health and environmental justice problems. And that coincides directly with the areas that have the fewest trees in the city. This is just a deep dive into some of the areas. This is Maine South, which is around Clark University. A lot of trees, to be fair, a lot of trees were planted here during the Asian longhorn beetle reforestation effort. But you can still see that there are streets with no street trees left on them. And that's something that we find very concerning and that we also advocate for. This is another part of Main Street where there are less trees. So that's important for city planners to understand. And then when they think about tree canopy, they can look into these areas and decide, you know, where would be the best places to increase that canopy. Back to my young adult foresters, trees need care. This is a site where a tree had fallen down, and the young man that I worked with this summer, the three of us went and we restaked the tree, pruned it up a little bit, watered it, got it in better shape. So trees, you know, they need ongoing care. A lot of times what we will do as an agency is we will go back to sites where we have planted and offer either training to the people taking care of the trees there, or we will actually do some tree help depending on what they need. Sometimes it's structural pruning, sometimes like this, they just need to be restaked. Sometimes we go back and water trees, especially during a drought situation with our watering team. This is an example of the watering team that I have out. It's a watering tank on the back of a truck, and we partner with the city of Worcester. They let us take water from the fire hydrants, fill up our tank, and then we give them a list of the trees that we have watered. Again, this is really critical for the establishment of trees in an urban setting. And this is another one of my young adult foresters watering a new city of Worcester street tree. We do a lot of pruning in the summer. Is not the best, the most optimal time to prune, but we will do it if we feel like we can't go back in the winter. I run a program now from mid-November through the end of March with a group of adult volunteers, and I train them how to structurally prune City of Worcester street trees, and then we go out and we help these trees out when they're young, because the best time to prune a tree really is when it's growing 2 years after establishment. Anyway, this is an example of some of the work we do at Dodge Park. We're either cutting back trees, taking weeds away from trees, or giving them a nice pruning before the cold months set in. As I mentioned before, we do a lot of community plantings. It's a great way to get trees in the ground. It's a great way for people to be educated around planting and establishment care for trees. I find the biggest problem in the urban setting is people not understanding the value of trees or then how to care for them. And so we do a lot of education, as I've mentioned before. And these trees were watered throughout the summer with the Clark University students and also with the Worcester Tree Initiative's watering program. This is an example of my winter pruning that I do. Again, we go for the smaller trees. For a lot of reasons, young trees, much like young people, heal faster from pruning cuts. And when their branches are smaller, it's a lot easier to get the structure correct than it is for a tree that's already been growing for 30 or 40 years and has some structural defects. Mostly what we look for when we prune street trees is we look to limb up the trees. So we try to get the branches as high up off the ground as is conducive to the growth of the tree. And that's so that people walking on a sidewalk or parking on a street, they don't interfere with the tree's growth, and they also don't get hurt by the tree. This is just a photo of a USDA climber. The USDA is very nice. They always come out and they educate some of the students that we're giving trainings to. And it's just a neat thing to see. Because this is what they do for a living. They will go and climb up in the tree canopy. In this particular capacity in Worcester, they're looking for Asian longhorn beetles still, but there are a lot of other reasons why you would climb in the canopy of trees as an arborist and a forester. So this is just another example of a job you could have in the industry. Another thing that I do is tree conservation. These are American chestnuts that have been hybridized through crossbreeding. We planted quite a few of them in Green Hill Park 6 years ago, and last year we started to pollinate them, harvest the nuts, and grow trees from seed. To me, this is a really exciting project. American chestnuts used to dot the entire eastern seaboard, and we've lost them due to a blight, but they're coming back. And so part of what I like to do is work with volunteers and facilitate with the city and grow specimen species such as these American hybridized chestnuts. Final thing that we do is we have an urban tree nursery. We tried new technology, which is gravel bed tree nurseries. We were successful in growing quite a few trees over this past spring and summer, and we've pulled many of the trees out and we're already planting them in the community. Some of them we're potting so that they get enough nutrition in the soil so that they can grow even more, and then I can give more out into the community. And this to me is a great way to grow more trees, so I can buy them cheaper as they're smaller, help them to grow through the summer, and then get them in the community. But it's also interesting for me to understand how trees do grow in this kind of an environment. So we've been doing some scientific studies on how trees really grow, gravel bed nurseries in this part of the world. So that is what I have. The final thing I will say, because I forgot to mention this, is going through school, I was not a horticulturist, and I did not study trees. I studied political science at a university in New York City. And interestingly enough, that's come really in handy when I decided to take on this kind of work because I deal with a lot of politicians. And as much as working individually with plants is very rewarding and fulfilling, I find it very exciting to advocate for trees with whatever leaders are in power at the moment. I also find it very exciting to coordinate volunteers to help with all this, boots on the ground projects that we coordinate. And so my hope is that through constant education and continuous advocacy, that we will just enhance the work of other foresters to keep the canopy in the forefront of everyone's mind when they develop cities and suburbs in the future. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Ruth. And we also have Nicole Keleher, who's Forest Health Director for Massachusetts Department of Conservation and Recreation. Take it away, Nicole.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nicole Keleher, and I am the Forest Health Director for the Massachusetts Department of Conservation and Recreation. And that pretty much means that I lead our state's forest health program. So we deal with a lot of the insect and disease issues in our trees throughout the state. We also deal with hazardous and our arboricultural needs in our state parks. So my position is a bit of a mix. So as a role as a director, I have to have some oversight and do some of the boring things in the position. So managing the budget, managing staff, reporting, mapping, data work. But I do get to get out in the field and work on leading some of our surveys, monitoring, and management options. So a position like mine, typically my counterparts in other states have advanced degrees, but there can be a lot of variability between what those degrees actually look like. So some people will have a more traditional forestry background, so degrees in classic forestry and backgrounds in previous jobs in more of a classical forestry type positions. Other people are entomologists, which means that they specialize in insects. Others are pathologists who specialize in fungal pathogens and other diseases of trees. And so mine's a little bit different of a journey to this job. I have a bachelor's degree in biology from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute and a master's degree in ecology from Utah State University. And when I first started college, I didn't think I wanted to get into forestry. I actually thought I wanted to be a dentist at first. So RPI is a small state in a small school in upstate New York. pretty much your classic Northeast school, brick buildings. The school focuses mostly on science and engineering classes. So my background is in pretty hard sciences, a lot of really advanced biology courses, molecular biology, genetics, biochemistry, but also things like organic chemistry, physics, calculus. So a solid science background, lab experience, that kind of work. Because I thought that I wanted to go into dental school and I thought it'd be very helpful. But when I was a junior, I applied for a new program that was starting at the school up on their lab on Lake George, the Darren Freshwater Institute, where you spent a semester taking all your classes out in the field on the lake, doing an independent research project, and having an internship. And I immediately fell in love with environmental work and knew that was what I wanted to do with my life. But in the environmental field, there's a lot of different types of jobs, a lot of different positions. And when I graduated, I still wasn't really sure what I had wanted to do exactly. So I knew I didn't want to get into academia. I didn't want to be a professor and go after research grants my whole life. I wanted to work more in resource management, working for maybe a government or a nonprofit, something like that. But I wasn't really sure, and I had never really left the Northeast. So after graduating, I ended up taking some seasonal positions. So there are a lot of seasonal jobs in the environmental field, since a lot of our work involves timing things really correctly to what's going on out in the world. So some of the jobs I took were a seasonal research assistant up in the Adirondacks. So this was a lot of water sampling. So most of the work was done on Lake George, but also going into remote Adirondack lakes and collecting samples out there. So a good amount of field work, getting out, getting wet, also spending a ton of time with my microscope and in the lab processing all those samples. We also did work with invasive species like zebra mussel and Asian clams. So doing field experiments and tank experiments with those. And I really loved it. I had a great time, but I grew up in New York. I spent my whole life in New York, and I kind of wanted to see what was out in other parts of the country, other ecotypes, other ecosystems. And I got a job out in Arizona, up in their White Mountains as a fisheries technician. So working on a project that was mostly electrofishing and fish population surveys, and also habitat metrics. So identifying habitat quality throughout these trout streams. It was a good time. And then I moved on. I ended up getting a job in a hatchery up in Alaska. So that was a high production salmon hatchery. So raising tiny little salmon, feeding them till they're about 4 inches long, and then setting them out into the wild where they grow up and live in the oceans. And then when they return, harvesting them. And I really hated this job. It was cold, it rained 6 out of every 7 days. I left in the summer and there was still snow on the ground. And I hated the smell, I didn't like the work. And before this, I had done a lot of my work in aquatic ecosystems, and I realized this really wasn't for me. It wasn't what I wanted to do with my life. I knew that it wasn't what I wanted to find a permanent position in. I also was kind of tired living out of a suitcase. So a lot of these jobs, you can find positions where you are provided housing. So you can try out new places and move far across the country and just pick up and go, and have somewhere that you know you're going to be able to stay while you're working. But it is kind of tiring after a while to not really have a place to settle down, only just having what you brought with you. And I was kind of ready to transition into a more permanent position, but I needed to make myself a little bit more competitive. So the environmental field is actually pretty competitive. Right now in my forest health program, we have a position we're hiring for, and we had over 110 applicants for a forestry assistant position, which is an entry-level position. So there's not a lot of jobs out there, and there's a lot of interest in them. So you want to make yourself as competitive as possible. So I went down to Utah and I started work. I went to graduate school at Utah State University, and I worked in plants. So getting away from being cold and wet and in the water all the time, staying on dry land. And I really loved working with plants, working with trees, getting to do that kind of thing. So my projects were based on plant community dynamics and interrupting microbial communities to benefit native plant restoration. So working on restoring native plant communities. And I built upon the skills I'd gained in those seasonal jobs. So in a lot of the seasonal jobs, it's a lot of field-based work, a lot of physical work, and I did gain a lot of skills. So I learned how to use a lot of equipment while out there for data collection. So GPSs, iPads, Trimbles, these kind of tools that are really widespread beyond just aquatic or fisheries fields, but are really applicable even in forestry. But also learning how to create a survey, how to manage your day, how to manage field work, how to be comfortable out in the field when it's not comfortable conditions. And those are all really great skills to have. So I had a lot of the physical field work skills, but I used my time in grad school to really build up my other skills, most of which were my computer-based skills. So taking courses in GIS, working on my mapping skills, taking statistics courses, working on my data entry, and most importantly, working on my writing skills. So my undergrad degree, they didn't have any, so since it's a small school, not a state school or anything like that, they didn't have any requirements for like English classes or writing classes. So I didn't have a lot of experience in that. And everything I did was really technical. So taking this time to really learn how to write effectively, how to communicate well, how to do things like write for applying for grants, write for research papers. And all of this really helped me get the jobs I wanted after this. And I was very lucky that after I graduated with my master's degree, I was able to move up to Washington State, where I was able to get a permanent position as a habitat restoration ecologist with the Confederated Tribes of the Colville Reservation. So this is in north central Washington, the dry, very rural, sparsely populated area. And my position worked on restoring degraded lands. So this reservation is bounded by the Columbia River, which has a lot of hydroelectric dams, which really impacted a lot of the habitat throughout the ecosystems throughout the reservations. So working on projects, tree replanting, soil and bank stabilization. A ton of work was done on fencing out cattle, because cattle can really degrade land quality very quickly. They can ruin vegetation, they can ruin soil stability. So removing that pressure from the landscape and then restoring what was there. I also worked on a team that dealt with post-wildfire assessments. So it's a part of the state where it's almost every year they have some level of wildfire on the reservation. So going through afterwards and assessing vegetation health, soil health, and forestry conditions, and then making recommendations on how to move forward and how to best protect these ecosystems. And I was able to use all my skills I had before this and what I learned in graduate school. And then I also got the ability to gain experience as a supervisor. I had a team of 5 field technicians that I oversaw and developed projects for them. So I love my job. It was a really cool place to live, but it's really rural. It's very far away. And I did grow up in the Northeast, so I did eventually want to move back home and be a little bit closer to my family. And I was very lucky to be able to get a position with the DCR as a Forest Health Specialist in 2016. So I moved back east and work out of Amherst, Massachusetts. And when I first joined the Forest Health program, I was a forestry assistant. So entry level, getting in at the ground floor, starting out. And I was the lead on a lot of our surveying and monitoring for invasive insects. So I did work with identifying emerald ash borer infestations, working on southern pine beetle trapping, releasing biocontrols for things like hemlock woolly adelgid and emerald ash borer, doing pesticide treatments for some of these pests and diseases, making recommendations. And I really loved it. So at that point, my position was probably 3 to 4 days a week out in the field, working on the ground with a lot of these projects. And then 1 to 2 days dealing with data, mapping, computer-based work like that. Something I really enjoyed. Eventually, I moved up to a Forester 1 position. And then last year, when my supervisor, Ken Gooch, retired, I was selected as the Forest Health Director and moved into my new position. So now I probably work 1 to 2 days in the field and have 3 to 4 days of office work, but I still get to get out and be part of these projects. And in the Forest Health program, we have about 30 full-time staff and 20 seasonal staff each year that work on a wide variety of our projects across the state. And among the different roles and positions, there's a lot of variability. So everyone always thinks forestry is the fun on the ground, getting out all day, touching trees, but there is a lot of background work that is necessary to make these projects run, to get funding for grants, for able to making sure we're actually spreading the word of what we're actually doing. We have a lot of outreach endeavors. So within our program, we have hazardous tree crews. So these are tree crews that go out and deal with any tree needs in our state parks, so removals, prunings, arboricultural needs. And those guys are out in the field almost every day of the week, getting out there, getting up in trees, going up in bucket trucks, climbing trees, running chainsaws. We also have Asian longhorn beetle survey staff who also spend a majority of their time in the field. They focus only on Asian longhorn beetle in our quarantine zone in the Worcester area, and they are out any day that the conditions allow. They're out there surveying for that, so they get a good amount of time out in the field. I have staff that are actually more administrative, so they are in the office 4 to 5 days out of a week and rarely go out, but they are a critical part of making sure our program functions. So in the environmental field, there's definitely different ways. There's tons of different types of career paths, tons of different jobs, but even in something as specialized as forest health, there's a lot of different options and choices available. So this is how my job looks and functions, the kind of projects we have here in Massachusetts, but it looks way different here in a state where we have a large urban interface. We're a pretty small state. We can get around areas really easily compared to out in the West, out in the Rocky Mountains or up in Alaska, where there's a lot more remote areas. They have to fly in. They use more remote sensing and other types of tools to get the data they need. And the type of projects they work on are at a much different scale than what we work on here. So trying out different jobs and trying out what feels like the right fit for you is really important. And it took me going through a few different jobs, finding jobs I really did not like before I kind of knew what I wanted to do. And I really love my position now. This is pretty much my dream job. I don't know if it's something that I will continue doing for the next 30 years or if I'll move on. Kind of at the level I'm at, I still get to go out and get in the field and be part of that. Kind of moving up in a forestry field beyond this is mostly management level. And you don't really get to do that quite as much, but some people, that's where they find their passion and something that they really enjoy. So there is a lot of opportunities. There's a lot of jobs out there, but it is challenging sometimes too. You have to have some patience when looking for careers in forestry and kind of work your way through what is right for you. Especially out here in the Northeast, we have a lot of people and not a lot of trees. So we have fewer job opportunities than some of the bigger states out West where they have some different funding sources and different resources. So sometimes you do need to spread your wings, move away from home a little bit, gain opportunities out in other locations, and then kind of gain those skills and abilities. So you don't need to know exactly what you want to do in the end, but try to gain those skills along the way. And you can really transition some of the things you're gaining and the knowledge you're gaining into other positions, even if they're not directly correlated. So feel free to send me an email. If you also go onto the mass.gov website and look up Forest Health, it has more information about our program and my phone number. So feel free to reach out if you have any questions about anything. Thank you. So
that's basically what I have. just want to leave you with a couple of, with one really cool photo. Is one of the great things we get to do, like Nicole said, is we do get to do the aerial surveys. And whenever a tornado comes through, that's one of the great things we get to do is fly over these tornado damage. So here's a little bit of damage from the Conway tornado in 2017, and a great picture of me goofing off while working. So that's all I have. Is there any questions? All right. I think we're all set, Britta.
I had thought of some, but it was all like, you know, what did you study when you were in college? And you did that because you all are so amazing, anticipating my all my questions. So thank you so much for this. I just want to give one more shout out to my attendees out there, Bethany, Devin, and Eli. If you have any questions, please. If you either raise your hand or you can type it in the question and answer. I can even let you talk since there's so few of us. Let me do that, and maybe you can. All right, so the three of you are clear. If you want to unmute yourself, you can speak up and say hi and ask your question. And if you don't want to, that's okay too.
Hey, I have a question. This is Eli.
Go for it.
Hey, Eli.
Hey, so I know from my experience in the natural resources world that it can be harder for women in the field. I think it's really amazing that all the panelists and everyone here is a woman in the field, and I was just wondering if you could speak to that a little bit.
Oof. Yeah, throughout my career, I've been one of the few, if not the only woman working. And for me, growing up with two brothers and a dad who treated me like a boy, it wasn't that big of a deal. You do get some unsavory comments from time to time, but I think that's true with any job. So I didn't have too many problems.
I think it can be challenging at certain levels, particularly when you're starting out and you're more introductory and they're more like physical demanding jobs. I know that I applied to a job that involved, they could only hire 2 seasonals and they had to live in a trailer together, but it involved packing in and out equipment. And I know that they ended up going with 2 males instead of females because they thought they'd be better able to do options like that. But as I've become more established, so in our program, there's 30 full-time staff. I only have 3 women out of that 30. But when I look at, as you move up the career ladder and you get to these more specialized positions, like for the New England states, there's 8 states that we work with frequently, and the leads for their forest health program, there are 4 men and 4 women. So it does eventually even out, but and some of the more physically demanding aspects of the job is where it becomes, I think, more challenging for women to get in the front door and kind of get into these positions and prove that they are just as capable.
I think for me, working at a botanic garden, it's actually very dominated by the female presence, depending on the department. But for me, again, when I'm in the city.
Oh, wait. Wait.
To me.
Sorry, I pushed the wrong button.
So when I'm in the city, I find advocating for trees or sitting on panels or whatever a lot, especially with DPW, I am a lot of times the only woman sitting at the table or one of a very few. And I think it's changed a lot since I was little. In terms of, comments and all that, everybody knows better than to do that. But where it's difficult is sort of the backdoor relationships that happen. So again, back to the city, it feels like, I'm not really part of the good old boys club. And sometimes it doesn't make a difference and sometimes it can. So that's just my experience.
Mm-hmm.
All right, anybody else have another question? Okay, terrific. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here, and to the three panelists for speaking and telling us your stories. This is really fascinating and fabulous, and we look forward to talking to you more in the future. All right, thanks for being
right.
here today.
Thank you.
you.
Thank you.